Hello, I'm Ann Gritch, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this segment of the oral history of the Diocese of San Jose. And I am particularly happy today because we have with us Father Larry Percell. Father Larry has a very interesting history here with our diocese, which he has served long and well, both as a lay minister as well as priest. So Larry, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ann.
So tell us, you were born and grew up in the Archdiocese of San Francisco.
I did. I was born and raised in San Francisco, and actually in the home my mother was born in.
Oh my!
In Noe Valley, and it's St. Paul's Parish.
You're an old San Franciscan.
An old San Franciscan, yes.
I love it.
Yeah. And from a very early age, I had an attraction to the priesthood. So when I graduated from the 8th grade at St. Paul's, I entered St. Joseph's College, the minor seminary for the Archdiocese, entered in 1961.
And it was located in Mountain View?
Well, that's the mailing address was in Mountain View. I'm not sure exactly where it was, what jurisdiction it was in.
But it was not in San Francisco.
But it was not in San Francisco, yes, yes. And when I entered, one of my classmates was now Bishop Rich Garcia. So
also another San Franciscan.
Another San Franciscan, yes.
So you went through St. Joseph's?
I did. I was there for 6 years, 6 very interesting years, because this was 1961 to 1967.
A lot going on.
A lot. The council took place during that time, and many of the faculty, the priest faculty, the Sulpicians, were very excited and interested in the council, so they were reading lots and sharing lots with us. So it was a very exciting time to be in the seminary.
I can imagine.
Upon graduating from St. Joseph's, I then transferred to St. Patrick's Seminary in Menlo Park, and I was there for about a year and a half. First philosophy, which would be the equivalent of junior year of college, and then about half of the senior year of college before deciding to seek a leave of absence, and so that I would have time to think further about what might lie ahead.
Interesting times, huh?
Yeah.
Yes. So when you left, you had not quite finished college.
That's correct.
And
yes.
And
so I transferred to Cal Berkeley. And I had taken a summer course there while I was still a seminarian, not realizing that since they were on the quarter system, I had in effect enrolled in the university. So it was very easy then for me to move from St. Patrick's to Cal, and I ended up finishing my degree there, although not in philosophy as it would have been at St. Patrick's, but in psychology.
Now that must have been quite a contrast.
It was
St. Patrick's.
It was a contrast, and it was during some of the most tumultuous years at Berkeley. I was there for 5 quarters, and we had National Guard on campus 3 of my 5 quarters there. You know, but it was a very different experience, another kind of exciting thing to live through. And so I'm grateful that I had that opportunity.
I can imagine. So after then, did you go right to graduate school?
Not exactly. I graduated in December of 1969, so by then it was too late by then I would apply for the fall of 1970.
Sure.
But along the same time, I was introduced to a young woman, Joan Herman, from San Mateo, St. Gregory's Parish, and Joan and I started dating, fell in love, and we were married in the summer of 1970 before moving to Tucson, where I went to graduate school for my doctorate in clinical psychology.
All right. So you were in Tucson for how long?
3 years.
3 years.
And I still had one more year of graduate school to complete, but that was an internship at the Veterans Hospital in Menlo Park.
Oh, perfect.
Right next door to St. Patrick's Seminary. So I was right back in the same neighborhood, and finished my internship and was fortunate enough to find a job in San Mateo County in community mental health there. So I wasn't unemployed for very long after graduate school.
And if I remember correctly, Joan was a teacher?
Well, she went into teaching when our children were entering junior high. She had majored in child development at the University of Arizona, so we were both students there for a period of time. And then once our children were in probably 3rd and 4th grade, she started taking classes at San Jose State to get her teaching credential.
So, now where were you living? Were you living in Santa Clara County or San Mateo County?
No, Santa Clara County. We settled in Sunnyvale when we moved back from Tucson, and continued living in Santa Clara County for the rest of our married life.
So, January 27th, 1981, an announcement comes out that San Jose is going to become a diocese. What was your reaction? Where were you? You had been pretty much involved in your parish,
Well, you know, we were not as involved at that point. I was thinking back about this, and you know, in 1981, our children were like 5 and 6 years old. Our focus was on our young family, my building a practice, and we were parishioners at St. Martin's in Sunnyvale, but we were not as engaged in parish life at that time. So we heard the announcement about the new diocese, but it was not like first and foremost in our minds at that time.
That was my experience as well. I was in the corporate world.
Okay.
And so yeah, I understand. It's interesting. And
right.
Yeah.
Yes. But I was by then teaching at St. Joseph's College. They offered a major in behavioral science, and you could specialize in psychology or sociology. So I was teaching psychology courses there. So I became very aware of the new diocese as they began to move their offices into the college seminary.
Now that must have been an interesting experience, teaching where you had gone to school, where there wasn't, when you were there, there wasn't that major, right, in behavioral.
That's
science.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So some changes.
Yeah.
In the time that you'd been away.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Although, you know, when I was at St. Patrick's Seminary and began to develop an interest in psychology, the academic dean at the time was Father John Mattingly, and he was very helpful to those of us who wanted to take classes off campus. As long as we kept our grades up. And so I actually enrolled at the College of San Mateo to get some basic psychology courses done while I was a student at St. Patrick's.
Right. Well, the Sulpicians have been I know them as very supportive and rather creative.
Right, right.
So that's... Now, you wound up teaching at St. Patrick's after.
I did. I taught at St. Joseph's for 12 years.
Oh, my.
And then by then there were 2 Sulpician priests with their doctorates in psychology. So I was not as needed as I had been earlier on, but there was an opening at St. Patrick's for someone to teach the pastoral counseling course. So in 1987, I started teaching at St. Patrick's and continued there until 2000.
That's an amazing situation. Now tell me a little bit about the later years with Joan and the all of your involvement in parish.
Well, yeah, over time we became more and more involved at St. Martin's. Our primary ministry actually evolved into the catechumenate.
Which was rather new. Huh?
Yes, yes. Although, to her credit, the pastoral associate, Patrice Underwood, had begun to introduce the catechumenate at St. Martin's before many other parishes did. And so then we teamed up with Patrice and eventually took over the major responsibility for that ministry.
Because that's when I got to know you, when I was in the worship office. And you and Joan were the catechumenate folk. Yes, in the diocese, actually.
Wow, yes.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and it was a wonderful ministry, welcoming new people into the faith community. And there was just lots of energy and enthusiasm and excitement in those years.
Yes. Yeah, they really were wonderful, wonderful years. And I also remember, and I wanted to ask you, you were in that first class of the Institute for Leadership and Ministry, which you came with your PhD and incredible amount of theology and your background. Why did you enroll?
Well, there were really several reasons. One is I had continued to have an interest in psychology. I mean, I'm sorry. Well, I did that too as well, but in theology. Going back to the council, one of the most profound effects of the council on me personally was the universal call to holiness, and the recognition that all disciples, are engaged in the mission of the church. And sometimes that mission is to the church community, sometimes it's to the wider community. And so I continued to read and study quite a lot, and then having the responsibility as the director of the catechumenate at St. Martin's, I also had that responsibility to know what I was talking about. And so when the Institute was announced, one of my motivations was that it was an opportunity to have like a more formalized instruction, and at that time I didn't know who the faculty would be, but I assumed that good people would be hired, and that was definitely the case. So it allowed me to study in a more organized fashion. It also brought me into contact with other lay leaders throughout the diocese that were not that different from Joan and me, and so that broader and wider sense of what this local church really looks like, especially in terms of lay leadership, was very helpful. And then I think the third reason is I had spoken to Bishop Pierre a number of times about the diaconate. And so I guessed that whenever the diaconate would be instituted in our diocese, the the ILM would have some part in that formation. So
you were absolutely correct.
yes.
If you're comfortable, could you just tell us a little bit about Joan's illness and her death and what happened after that?
Certainly. In the summer of 1999, and this would have been the summer before my third and final year in the ILM, Joan was very, very fatigued. Mm-hmm. Now, most teachers are fatigued. And in previous years, after 2 or 3 weeks of rest, she would bounce back and then have her summer activities and whatnot. This year, that year, 1999, she did not bounce back. And so went to her doctor, tests were run. Her liver functioning showed an abnormal enzyme that her primary care physician was not that concerned about, but wanted to redo the test. Mm-hmm. Well, the test was even more abnormal the second time than the first. Long story short, what is Joan was diagnosed with metastatic liver cancer. They didn't know the origin, where the cancer had metastasized from, but over the course of the next 7.5 months, it became very obvious that the origin was in her pancreas. So she had pancreatic cancer, underwent chemotherapy 3 different times, and eventually it was clear that the chemotherapy was really actually advancing her death sooner than the cancer would mm-hmm. have. And so that's what, what happened.
Yeah. And after that?
Well, Joan lived for 7.5 months from the time of diagnosis and to her death. And we had a number of very close friends who were nurses. Mm-hmm. And one of our nurse friends, who was particularly helpful to us because she would translate for us things that the doctors, the oncologists were saying. And one of her comments to me was, Larry, the blessing in this is it's not going to last too long. Mm-hmm. Not that we wanted Joan to die in short order, but what I took it to mean is that Joan's suffering was not going to be prolonged. But what it also meant to me was that in short order, I was going to be a single man again. Mm-hmm. Joan said to me once early on in her treatment, if I don't survive this, I know where I'll find you. And she was referring to the priesthood. Mm-hmm. I was never comfortable talking to her about it because I didn't want her to think that I was fast forwarding in my life, that I was looking beyond our life together, mm-hmm. That, we had made promises to one another, to be faithful in sickness and in health, and I wanted her always to feel that whatever that meant, I was there 100%. Mm-hmm. But another friend of mine said to me after Joan died, when I shared with him what she had said, he said, Joan was giving you permission to think about the future, mm-hmm. And
from what I knew of her, that would be very Joan.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you go back to St. Patrick's.
I went
as
back
a
to
student
St.
again.
Patrick's Seminary, yes, yeah, in January of 2001.
Mm-hmm.
It was just about 8 months after Joan had died, actually. But I felt very ready to do that. Our children were incredibly supportive. They both spoke to me about it, and when they wanted to know what my plans were, and I told them I was thinking about going back into the seminary, and they both said separately to me, "Dad, we wouldn't have been surprised, but Mom has told us to expect this." You know. And yeah, so then I'm a student again at in an institution where I had been on the faculty.
How was that?
Awkward.
Yes.
Yes, very awkward.
Yes, I can imagine.
Yeah, you know, but the faculty was great. You know, they made it. They still treated me like a professional, and but the biggest struggle that I had was, with a very few exceptions, most of the students were younger than my children.
Yes.
And most of them were learning theology in a second language. English was not their first language. And so even though I didn't have an advanced degree in in theology, I would sit in class, I would get it the first time, you know. And so it felt, it was not as challenging as I would have liked.
Sure. Understandably
But
so.
again, the faculty was creative, and the bishop was creative. He advanced my ordination as a deacon, and then allowed me to live in a parish my last 2 semesters, so I was just commuting to the seminary rather than living there, and that helped a great deal. I felt like a big boy again, you know, so.
You know, it's interesting, our other 2 priests who were married, widowers, said the same thing, that, yeah, they felt like little kids again.
Yeah.
So, and understandably, yeah. So you were a deacon at St. Nicholas in Los Altos, and parochial vicar there, and then pastor.
And then pastor, yes.
What were some of the challenges, and what were some of the joys?
Well, the joys, the people by and large are great, and they enthusiastically embraced having a deacon and then a priest there who had been married with children.
And ultimately grandchildren.
And grandchildren, yes. And the other real joy for me was liturgy has always been one of my loves. But I was always a bridesmaid and never a bride. You know, I would be the master of ceremonies at the Triduum at St. Martin's for years. You know, so that we didn't have liturgy performed by the Keystone Cops. But now, you know, to be the presider, and especially once I became pastor, to set the tone for the liturgical life of the parish, hiring good people. I wanted our Sunday liturgies to be lively, joyful, reverent. I wanted people to feel better when they left Mass than they did when they arrived, and to be able to, in a sense, make my mark on the life of the parish in that way was a tremendous grace for me.
Mm-hmm. Challenges?
Challenges, one of the challenges in an upper middle class parish is that, and this is, I don't want to overstate this, it's kind of a trend, but they're used to being able to hire people to do things for them. And so, again, without overstating it, it's harder to develop voluntarism in a situation like that. It's like, well, do it for us. And then the other challenge is a similar kind of thing, a consumerism, where they engage in the parish around a particular need. And once that need is met and fulfilled, there's not the enduring commitment to the parish, which is not the way the church that I grew up in was,
Yes.
You stayed involved in the parish even when your kids graduated from the parochial school.
Precisely.
And there were lots of folks like that at St. Nicholas, actually, but they were older. They were the older generation. And so the younger generation who would have the energy to really engage, again, they would engage around a particular need, and then they move on.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. Just yeah, we could spend a lot of time talking about that, but that's really not. I was thinking to myself that you served in your lifetime as an active lay minister. We would call you a lay ecclesial minister now, except we didn't have that term then. Also as priest, as ordained minister. So you've got two different perspectives. I'm just wondering any comments or insights that might have come from just thinking about that.
Well, I think it speaks to Bishop Dumain's foresight in establishing the ILM, because I think the first generation of lay ecclesial ministers, and I would consider myself, as you mentioned, one of the first generation, we were either sisters who had left teaching to work in parishes, former seminarians who had been formed in the seminary and received, some degree of theological training, but we're all 70 years old or older now. So if there weren't an institute for leadership in ministry to train the subsequent generations of lay ecclesial ministers, we'd be up a creek, So I think that's very, very fortunate. I do think, though, one of the I think formation is a critical issue. When you're preparing for ordained ministry, or when you're preparing for a religious life, a lot goes into formation, spiritual direction, living in community that's all focused on a similar outcome. I think that is one challenge for lay ecclesial ministers, that they be provided enough opportunity for spiritual formation, vocational formation, not just information that they need to function in their ministry, their job.
Right. Yeah. It's true. It's true. So you are now a retired priest of our diocese. tell us what you're doing ministerially.
Okay. Well, I retired from a diocesan assignment in 2014. I'm a type 1 diabetic. I've been diabetic for now 54 years. And I had hoped to be able to serve in a diocesan assignment until I was 70. And I turned 70 in 2017. I suddenly just did not have the stamina or the energy to keep going. And I think, fortunately, I don't have serious complications from diabetes yet, but I think it's taken its toll. So for 3 years then, after St. Nicholas, I lived at the Jesuit Retreat Center in Los Altos and worked there as a spiritual director and a retreat director about half-time. But that I finished up my 3-year commitment there last spring.
When you turned 70.
When I turned 70. And so now I live in my home in Santa Cruz County, actually overlooking the Monterey Bay, which is just beautiful. And I do help out in parishes. Resurrection and Aptos is like my primary go-to parish. I'm there about twice a month for Mass or other sacraments. And when I get requests from pastors in our diocese, San Jose, I make an effort to respond to those. But other than that, I'm walking on the beach and reading lots and
being dad and grandpa.
And being dad and grandpa, yes.
Sounds good. And of course, you're living in the diocese whose bishop is your former classmate.
That's right. That's right.
The Catholic world is a small one.
It really is.
How do you see the future of our diocese? What do you see as our strengths? What kind of challenges do you think that we're going to face? You know, our second bishop is nearing retirement.
Yes, yeah. Well, I think our strengths are the two bishops we've had and the kind of vision that they've had and the kind of history that we've had, the foundation in, you know, for a great deal of lay involvement. And as I understand it, that precedes the creation of our diocese. That Santa Clara County always had more lay involvement and lay leadership than the other counties in the Archdiocese. The presence of Santa Clara University helped that. And, and so I think that history, that foundation, that culture is a strength here. I think the challenges going forward are really facing every diocese in America. Pope Francis is asking all Catholics to understand ourselves as missionary disciples. And I think that the parish system in the United States has actually functioned very well. Even though their numbers are shifting and populations are moving, I think the structure of the parish has been very successful but limiting. I think we need to be looking at both mission and maintenance. And I think the parish structure is heavily loaded on maintenance, maintaining important ministries, important services, but then that gets our focus internally rather than looking beyond ourselves. And I think that Pope Francis is absolutely right. We do have to be looking beyond ourselves. We have to be going to the margins, because there are lots of people that could be served by the church, could be invited by the church, but they're not going to come to us.
Right.
We have to go to them, and we have to be willing to listen to them and understand their experience. And right now, there are not enough disciples that are excited about that vision and equipped to move in that direction. And I don't say that just about lay people. That's true of the priests as well. Yeah. You know, our focus is very internal. Yeah. So I see numbers of committed, passionate missionary disciples, both ordained and lay, to be the biggest challenge ahead of us.
Well said. I would absolutely agree. Yes, thank you for that. Anything else we should be talking about? This has been just wonderful.
Thank you, Ann. Yes, I've enjoyed it. I enjoyed it too. I'm sure things will occur to me after,
of course.
After our time together. But
well, we've covered a lot.
I would like to say though, I love being a Catholic. Now there have been periods of time when it's been easier for me to love being a Catholic than other times. But this is one of the times where I am just head over heels in love with being a Catholic, and so grateful to have had the opportunities that I've had in my life, you know, to be a committed layman, to be an ordained minister.
And to continue serving in retirement.
And to continue serving, you know. Obviously, the sadness in all of that is the loss of Joan. Sure. Because I wouldn't have had this opportunity now in the second half of my life, except for her death. But you know, to have grown up in this time of the Second Vatican Council, and to see the spirit of the council catching fire again. Exactly. So
it's a wonderful note on which to end.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome,
It was
Ann.
good to be with you.
Good to be with you too.